Story 1. My mom and sister still live together. They couldn't afford rent or their car between the two of them. They nearly had the car repossessed and were close to eviction until my grandmother loaned them enough money to keep the car and stay in their apartment. She explicitly said, "Pay me back when you're more stable." For months later, my sister received her tax refund of around $4,500. She has a child and is not with the father. Instead of making any effort to pay my grandmother back, paying off the car, or creating an emergency fund, they bought an expensive purebred puppy, an Airedale Terrier. They spent over $2,000 on the dog and then another $500 on a crate, toys, leashes, and dog food. Less than 6 months later, they lost the car and were evicted. They moved in with my aunt, and her husband hated the dog, so it was taken to the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. The dog wasn't even a year old. My grandmother didn't see a cent of the money returned before she died. So there's that. People bad with money buy things they can't afford instead of stabilizing what they already have. Story 2. I work on cars for a living, and the vast majority of the BMWs that come into my shop have slick tires and lights blinking on their dashboards. Many of these people can barely afford a luxury car, let alone the maintenance required to keep them nice and running. Story 3. I had a buddy in college who would go through a cycle of bragging about how much money he had, spending it all on dumb stuff, then bragging about how poor he was, all while bragging about how he was a rich kid. The best part was when he was bragging about having some money to this girl he liked. It turns out that girl came from an actually wealthy family. She said, "It's only $5,000. Why do you keep mentioning it? Is that a lot to you?" That event shut him up for a bit. Story 4. Depends on what you call bad. My sister has been a saver and penny pincher since childhood, which was a bit traumatic, admittedly. She is now nearing retirement, and everything she and her husband have is paid off. She isn't rich but will have the comfortable retirement she has earned and deserves. She hates going into debt, and her cards are paid down monthly. Sounds great, right? It would be if she wasn't so completely obsessed and angered by people who don't do or think as she does, including her husband. For instance, her house and cars are modest to decent, while her friends are all buying nicer things, vacation homes, travel, and other luxury items. Most, if not all, of these things are paid for with credit, and it just drives her crazy. She is so jealous of what they have, yet so angry at how they got it. On the occasion that she and her husband join friends for a cruise or resort stay, her main concern is cost, which ruins a huge part of the trip for her every time, and monitoring how others are wasting their money. This is never to their faces. This is just what she says to me after. Her husband used to be a pretty fun guy about 30 years ago when they met, but he has become bitter and grumpy after decades of having to fight for things she deems unnecessary, like tickets to his favorite concerts or pricey sports and music memorabilia that he's always been into. It has resulted in dishonesty between the two, which is not the kind of guy he really is, and she has grown disgusted by his need for childish hobbies and entertainment. My sister has always been a bit of a fun hater, but it's gotten to the point where it makes her, and sometimes the people around her, miserable. She lives and works in a small town and pays attention to who is getting free lunch, who is paying with food stamps at checkout, who is driving a car they can't afford, etc. She has called me and listed the items she's seen a family buying with food stamps. Can't fathom them buying Doritos and Kool-Aid. There is more than one way to be bad with money. Story 5. Looking at payment amount and not purchase price. A coworker asked one time, "This phone is $1,300, but I can get it for just $60 per month for 2 years. Seems like a good deal to me. $60 per month isn't that much. Should I do it?" I asked him, "Does your phone work?" "Yes." "Okay, if someone dropped $1,300 in your lap right now, is this what you would spend it on?" "No? Then it's not a good use of your money." He showed up to work the next week with the brand new phone. Another coworker wanted a Honda Ridgeline. He went to a car broker and said he wanted this truck, X years, Y miles, and his payment could only be $500 per month. He was amazed the guy got him the truck for that payment. He had no idea what his final purchase price was, what his loan term was, or what his interest rate was. All he knew was that he could afford the payment. Story 6. As someone who was formerly bad with money, I was in a cycle of debt, using applications to borrow money to pay towards my credit cards and to have money for food. Thankfully, I'm no longer trapped in this cycle, and I never want to be in that cycle again. Story 7. My family is in $20,000 of debt, but my mother and her brother just went on her 13th trip to Spain in the last 12 months. Because I can afford it, she snapped at 3 in the morning on a Sunday, as I caught her sneaking out for another one. She thinks that I'll get a well-paying job to bail her out, which is not happening because if I gave her the money for the debt, she'd probably spend it all from when she leaves the house and on the way to the bank. She works a minimum wage, 12 hours a week job. High school dropout. She had my father deported after an argument when I was young, bragging about it to this day. My older sister, a full-time college student, has a part-time job at the same place she works and earns almost twice as much, minus the overtime. Story 8. My ex-wife and I filed for bankruptcy before our divorce. 80% of the debt was in her name. We divorced for other reasons, but money was part of it. I left her the house, but she could not keep up with the bills, so instead of selling, it had to be foreclosed on. She met a guy and they moved to a rented house. He maintained the bills and wasn't a bad guy. I even met him a few times. They broke up, and again she was evicted for not paying rent and bills. Now she lives with her sister, and the kids I was paying child support for now live with me. She has been living with her sister for 3 years and still can't afford to move out. Story 9. People who put pictures of money around their house say that money will manifest in their lives. I met a whole group of these people through my ex-wife once, and not a single one of them has a consistent or successful work history. Story 10. My wife has 2 friends who are the worst people I've ever met regarding money. Friend 1. They have a child and are convinced they can manage on one income because my parents could do it. The wife has a shopping addiction and is constantly buying expensive clothes for her baby and things for the house. The husband works stocking shelves and sometimes drives for a rideshare service. They had a $70,000 settlement that they wasted in about a year. They got evicted from their apartment for not paying and had their Cadillac, for which they are paying $750 a month, repossessed twice. Now they are moving into a more expensive house to rent. According to my rough estimate, their housing and car expenses exceed what the sole income is making from retail. Friend 2 also has a child and had their, more reasonable, in fairness, car repossessed many times. They moved out of state for the husband's job, where he was making good money, and he lost his job for not showing up. They moved back and started begging for money constantly, asking their parents, friends, and even me, not really a friend, but I guess she got my payment app info to request money. They got evicted because they haven't paid rent in months. They are not looking for jobs, nor are they searching for apartments, and they will probably soon be homeless with their child. A shame, because the job they moved out of state for could pay up to $150,000, but instead he's unemployed and she's working at a daycare part-time. They are all nice people, and I understand that times are hard because we're still young and starting out, but I've never met 4 people so bad at handling money. Story 11. Living paycheck to paycheck and eating or ordering out. If you barely have enough money at the end of the month, you should not be doing that. It sucks. I think wages need to go up, but it is what it is. Story 12. My girlfriend and I keep our finances separate. Why? She once did some extra work somewhere for 1 day only, and this was paid well. 2 weeks later, she came up to me asking for some money. Me. Why? Her. Because I still haven't got my money for this work I had done recently. Me. So? This was a one-time thing? It should have given you extra money, but now you're out of money. Her. Yes, I already bought some things I wanted. Me. Even if they didn't pay you already? What about the money you usually earn? Turns out she literally spends everything she gets. Now she got some extra money and already spent it on even more useless stuff. That's why we keep finances separated. I would be bankrupt if she had access to my account. Story 13. Impulse buying and never checking the price of anything. One unique case. A guy I knew in college seemed very mentally unstable and would spend very recklessly on little things like claw machines and other similar items. We would tell him to slow down, and he always replied, "It's okay, my parents are rich." From what I know, his parents weren't. Story 14. My friend bought 2 rent-to-own couches. She makes over $90,000. I'm not sure how much her husband currently makes, but it's over $50,000. That's what he made before a promotion. Why buy a couch like this? Their dogs tore it up after only having it for 1 month, but they owe 2 more years on the couches. The couches were less than $2,000, and they're fabric, not leather. She also bought a boat but didn't buy a trailer or a vehicle that can tow the boat. So her brother took the boat to use it, and she hasn't seen it since 3 years ago. Story 15. Nice cars outside rundown homes. If you have a $50,000 vehicle and a tarp on your roof, you most likely have your priorities in the wrong order. When I worked in finance at a dealership, it was unbelievable how many people came in looking for higher trim-level vehicles for over $50,000 on $50,000 household incomes. Story 16. My neighbor, who is a renter, just bought a Cybertruck to park alongside his Porsche. And yesterday the mailman mistakenly gave us some of his mail, and it included a postcard from the power company saying he owes more than $400 and they are about to shut off his power. So all of that. Story 17. When you receive a relatively large insurance settlement after becoming permanently disabled in a way that prevents you from working, and you need to live off that money for an unknown amount of time, you immediately spend several $1,000s on redoing the entire living room in camouflage. Also, knowing you will be in a wheelchair for about 3 to 4 months, you spend another several thousand out of that limited sum to turn the already good-sized back porch into a giant deck so you can roll around in bigger laps. Story 18. Renting something to own it from Rent-A-Center because you couldn't afford to buy it outright. My brother-in-law and sister-in-law do this all the time, and their justification is unreasonable. Well, I justify it because I can't afford to pay the $500 right now, but I can afford to pay $100 per month over the course of 7 months. Or something like that. Basically, they can't afford the lump sum price now, but they can afford to make monthly payments that add up to way more than the actual price of the item. Story 19. I kept my savings in an account earning 0.25% interest compounded quarterly for many years before I finally moved it to an account earning 5% compounded daily and deposited into my account monthly. So I guess I am pretty bad with money. Story 20. Buying a new car because your old one is going to be out of warranty soon and you can't afford an unexpected repair bill. Then buying the new one based on monthly payments and not the out-the-door price. And then doubling down and letting them basically steal your trade-in, which had equity. Had a friend do this. We had the same car 6 years ago. Mine is a lower trim level. My friend replaced theirs twice since I got mine because of the warranty each time. Mine's been paid off for years. Why not just pay it off and bank the payment money for repairs? I'll never understand this. Story 21. Buying a new car but dealing with negative equity from your trade-in because you didn't finish paying off the last one before you convinced yourself you deserve a new one. Similarly, people who have one child and insist that they need an $80,000 plus SUV for one small child in a car seat. Story 22. I mentioned to a coworker that I was retiring next year in January, and she asked me how. I told her it's because of our 401k, which is very generous. We both have been at the same organization for over 25 years, and she said she has almost nothing in her 401k. I said, why don't you have much in your 401k? It's been a 200% match up to 5% of your gross for 25 years. You should be loaded. She said, every time the economy goes down, like in the dot-com crash or the housing crisis or the COVID crash, I would see how low it was getting, get scared and take it out and spend the money. So basically, she paid taxes and penalties every time the stock market bottomed out when it was worth the least. She also complains how the system is against people because she can't retire when she wants to now. Story 23. Owning a timeshare. Full disclosure. I own a timeshare. In my defense, my mother was going to have to file bankruptcy because of it if I didn't take it off her hands because they're practically unsellable, even though it has a deed. So I got it for free. Not only is the original model a bad investment, but now people are paying $20,000 for vacation points that they can use anywhere, and then having to pay $1,000 a year or more on maintenance for points, which makes no sense whatsoever. At least I can pretend the $1,000 a year I pay for maintenance goes to actually maintaining the piece of property I pretend to own. But for $1,000 a week, I could find a very nice unit to rent in the same area. Definitely a bad money move. Story 24. Tattoos, for the most part, are something I have and love. However, the number of times I've seen friends show off fresh ink just a week after complaining about money is surprising. Story 25. Having an expensive car and complaining about how everything is so expensive or that they can't afford something. I have someone in my circle that makes nearly $100,000 from home, with no student debt or anything like that, but absolutely refuses to live anywhere but downtown in the city. $2,000 rent per month. They purchased an expensive car, $900 monthly payment, have to pay to park it, over $100 per month, and don't drive it. They complain about having over half of their money disappear every month when they could just not have purchased an $85,000 paperweight and moved 20 miles north to a nice suburb for half the rent. The same person will say things like, "Eat the rich," and in reality, they're squandering over 50% of their cash every month on things they don't need. Don't even get me started on the bills from eating out, traveling, etc. Smart person, bad with money,